In the glittering world of 1980s Hollywood, few names burned brighter than Kim Basinger. With her icy blonde beauty, sultry voice, and hypnotic screen presence, she quickly rose from model to international star, becoming one of the most recognizable sex symbols of her time. When audiences first saw her in 9.5 Weeks opposite Mickey Rourke, she became a cultural obsession, the very image of desire, fantasy, and forbidden passion. Just a few years later, as the cool and alluring Vicky Vale in Batman, she cemented her place in Hollywood history. But behind the glossy magazine covers, the perfectly styled red carpet appearances, and the illusion of effortless glamour, there was another Kim Basinger, fragile, anxious, and deeply private. Beneath the shimmering lights of fame, she was a woman caught between the demands of Hollywood and her own secret struggles. The world saw the fantasy, the ultimate 1980s goddess. What they didn't see was the anxiety that sometimes left her unable to leave her home. What they didn't hear were the whispered stories of romances that never made the tabloids. And what they never knew were the private passions that burned quietly behind closed doors. Among those stories, two names stand out. Two men whose presence in Kim Basinger's life became the stuff of rumor, legend, and endless speculation. The first was Mickey Rourke, her co-star in 9.5 Weeks. Together, they created one of the most erotic and controversial films of the decade, a movie so raw and intimate that audiences were convinced their passion wasn't just acting. Was their chemistry on screen merely performance, or did it spill into reality, creating a secret connection hidden from the public eye? The second name is even more mysterious: Prince. At the very height of his fame, the musical genius behind Purple Rain crossed paths with Kim during the making of Batman in 1989. Prince provided the soundtrack. Kim was the face of the film. Rumors swirled of late-night studio sessions, whispered collaborations, and even a secret fling. The union of Hollywood's sex goddess and music's most enigmatic star was too tantalizing to ignore, yet neither ever spoke of it publicly, leaving fans and insiders to wonder what really happened between them. These two names, Mickey Rourke and Prince, represent two sides of the secret life of Kim Basinger. One was raw, combustible, almost dangerous. The other was mysterious, magnetic, and untouchable. Together, they paint a picture of a woman whose personal story was far more complex than the silver screen ever revealed. Because in Hollywood, especially in the 1980s, image was everything. Stars were packaged, polished, and presented as fantasies, not people. But if you peel back the glamour, you find the truth: fragile, passionate, and often far more dramatic than any movie role. In the quiet suburbs of Athens, Georgia, in the 1950s, few could have imagined that a shy little girl named Camila Ann Basinger would one day grow into one of Hollywood's most iconic figures. Born on December 8, 1953, Kim grew up in a modest Southern household. Her father, a World War II veteran, worked as a musician and loan manager, while her mother was a model and swimmer. From an early age, Kim inherited her mother's statuesque beauty, but she also carried something far less visible: an intense shyness that bordered on crippling. As a child, Kim was so introverted that teachers described her as almost mute. She could barely bring herself to speak in front of classmates, and the thought of public attention terrified her. Ironically, this same quiet aura would one day become one of her greatest assets in Hollywood: a sense of mystery, allure, and fragility that audiences couldn't look away from. By her teenage years, Kim's beauty was impossible to ignore. Encouraged by her mother, she entered local beauty pageants. Though painfully shy, her striking blonde looks and graceful presence quickly set her apart. Soon, she was crowned Athens Junior Miss, which launched her into a whirlwind of modeling opportunities. In the early 1970s, Basinger signed with Ford Modeling Agency, one of the most prestigious names in the fashion industry. She moved to New York City, where her southern shyness was both a hurdle and a charm. Kim became a sought-after model, gracing the covers of magazines, appearing in catalogs, and even starring in high-profile ad campaigns. At the height of her modeling career, she was earning over $1,000 a day, a fortune for the time. But modeling, as glamorous as it appeared, never truly satisfied her. Kim later confessed that she often felt like a mannequin, admired for her looks but stripped of her voice. Acting, with its emotional depth and storytelling, called to her. So, in the mid-1970s, she made a daring move. she left New York and headed west to Los Angeles, chasing a dream she could barely admit out loud. Kim's early years in Hollywood were filled with small TV roles and guest appearances. She popped up in series like Charlie's Angels and Macmillan and Wife, playing the kind of decorative roles young actresses were often boxed into. But behind the scenes, she was studying acting, pushing herself beyond her shyness, and preparing for bigger opportunities. Her first real breakthrough came in 1981 with the film Hard Country. Playing opposite Jan Michael Vincent, Kim proved she could carry a leading role. Though the film wasn't a massive hit, critics noticed her blend of vulnerability and sensuality, a combination that would soon become her trademark. In 1984, she starred in The Natural alongside Robert Redford. The film, a sweeping baseball drama, showcased Kim as Memo Paris, the stunning femme fatale who tempts Redford's character. The role catapulted her into the spotlight. She wasn't just a pretty face, she was a magnetic screen presence, capable of stealing scenes from Hollywood legends. If The Natural put her on the map, 9.5 Weeks turned her into an icon. Released in 1986, the erotic drama paired her with Mickey Rourke, then one of Hollywood's most unpredictable rising stars. Directed by Adrian Lyne, the film told the story of a torrid, obsessive affair between an art gallery worker, Basinger, and a mysterious Wall Street broker, Rourke. The movie was controversial from the start, pushing the boundaries of sexuality in mainstream cinema. But what made it unforgettable was the chemistry between Kim and Mickey. Their on-screen passion felt so raw, so real, that audiences and critics were convinced the line between acting and reality had blurred. Rumors flew that their relationship continued off-set. Neither Kim nor Mickey confirmed the stories, but insiders whispered about a fiery, secret romance. What couldn't be denied was how the film cemented Kim's image, the ultimate 1980s sex symbol, both irresistible and untouchable. Yet behind the steamy imagery, Kim was struggling. The filming of 9.5 Weeks was emotionally exhausting for her. She later admitted that certain scenes left her shaken, even traumatized. The film may have projected her as a goddess of desire, but in reality, she was a deeply sensitive woman overwhelmed by the demands of stardom. As her fame skyrocketed, so did the pressure. Kim suffered from intense anxiety and what doctors later described as agoraphobia, a fear of public spaces. While she appeared on red carpets and magazine covers as the epitome of confidence, privately she often retreated into isolation. At times, she avoided leaving her house for months. This fragility clashed with Hollywood's relentless demands. Studios wanted her to be glamorous, seductive, and confident at all times. Kim, meanwhile, longed for privacy and stability. Friends described her as a paradox. On screen, she radiated icy coolness. Off-screen, she was shy, nervous, and uncertain. The media painted her as a mysterious goddess, but few understood how deeply she struggled with the spotlight. This tension between image and reality became the defining theme of her career. By the late 1980s, Kim Basinger was one of Hollywood's most bankable stars. And in 1989, she reached her commercial peak with Tim Burton's Batman. Cast as Vicky Vale, the glamorous photojournalist and love interest to Michael Keaton's Batman, Kim brought a mix of elegance and vulnerability to the role. The movie was a cultural phenomenon, shattering box office records and redefining the superhero genre. For Kim, it marked her transition from erotic icon to mainstream A-lister. Suddenly, she wasn't just the woman from 9.5 Weeks, she was a household name, a star of the biggest movie of the year. But even as she smiled for the cameras, walked the red carpets, and basked in global fame, the gap between her public image and her private reality only grew wider. The goddess everyone adored was, in truth, a woman wrestling with fear, loneliness, and the weight of expectations. By the end of the 1980s, Kim Basinger had gone from shy Georgia girl to the pinnacle of Hollywood stardom. But fame came with shadows, secrets, struggles, and whispered romances that the world was only beginning to guess at. And at the center of those whispers were two names that would follow her for decades: Mickey Rourke and Prince. Mickey Rourke never looked like a traditional Hollywood star. While most leading men of the 1980s had polished smiles and clean-cut images, Rourke radiated danger. Born Philip Andre Rourke Jr. on September 16, 1952, in Schenectady, New York, his childhood was rough, filled with strict Catholic schooling, neighborhood fights, and a burning need to escape. He turned first to boxing, and for a while it looked as though he might make it in the ring. But acting came calling, and by the late 1970s, he was already being described as the next Brando, raw, intense, unpredictable. By the early 80s, Rourke had carved out a reputation in Hollywood as one of the most magnetic yet volatile actors of his generation. His breakout role in Diner, 1982, proved he had something rare, a smoldering charisma that could make even a quiet scene crackle with tension. In films like Rumble Fish and Angel Heart, he embodied the archetype of the dangerous outsider, a man both irresistible and unsettling. While many actors chased box office safety, Rourke chased characters who lived on the edge. That reputation followed him into 1986, when he took on the role that would forever define his career in popular culture. John Gray, the mysterious Wall Street broker in 9.5 Weeks. It was a film destined to ignite controversy. Erotic, experimental, and at times brutal, it pushed the boundaries of what mainstream cinema had shown before. Audiences had never seen anything quite like it, and at the center of the storm were Mickey Rourke and Kim Basinger. The chemistry between them was undeniable. From the moment their characters met, the screen pulsed with tension. He was commanding, she was vulnerable, and together they created an intensity that critics described as both intoxicating and unsettling. For viewers, it was impossible to separate the fiction from the reality. Were these two just acting, or was something more happening behind the cameras? Rumors spread quickly. Some on set claimed the attraction was real, that Kim and Mickey were drawn to each other in ways that couldn't be contained by the script. Others argued it was simply the result of Rourke's method approach to acting. He was known for immersing himself completely in his roles, blurring the lines between performance and personal life. With a film as provocative as 9.5 Weeks, those blurred lines became fodder for endless speculation. For Kim, the experience was far from glamorous. She later admitted that the filming left her shaken and emotionally raw. Certain scenes, designed to push her limits, were so intense that she described them as traumatic. While Rourke seemed to thrive in the chaos, feeding off the volatility of the set, Kim withdrew further into herself. That contrast only fueled the mystery. Was their on-screen passion an extension of something real, or was it simply the product of two actors colliding with very different approaches to their craft? What made the speculation so powerful was how both of them refused to clarify. Neither ever fully denied nor confirmed an off-screen romance. Rourke occasionally hinted at the intensity of their connection, dropping cryptic comments in interviews. Kim, for her part, chose her words carefully, acknowledging the emotional toll but never directly addressing the rumors. In Hollywood, silence can be as telling as confession. The absence of clear answers only deepened the myth. Outside of 9.5 Weeks, Rourke was living a life that seemed just as combustible as his characters. He clashed with directors, fought with producers, and became notorious for walking away from promising projects. At a time when he could have cemented himself as one of Hollywood's biggest leading men, he often sabotaged his own opportunities. By the 1990s, his frustrations with the film industry led him back into boxing, a brutal career choice that left him battered, scarred, and physically transformed. The self-destruction only added to his legend. Rourke was the quintessential bad boy, a man who seemed incapable of playing by the rules, whether in Hollywood or in life. His unpredictability made him fascinating, but it also made him dangerous. For someone like Kim Basinger, who was already battling her own anxieties, being linked with Rourke only amplified the sense of danger and secrecy. If they had shared a romance, it would have been almost impossible to sustain in the harsh glare of the press. Yet, the fascination never faded. Even decades later, the question lingers. Did Kim and Mickey share a hidden affair during the making of 9.5 Weeks? Or was the truth something more elusive? Two actors caught in an emotional storm, creating a performance so real that even they struggled to separate fiction from reality. The lasting myth is part of what keeps the film alive today. Long after its release, 9.5 Weeks continues to be discussed, dissected, and remembered not just for its provocative imagery, but for the mystery surrounding its stars. If Kim embodied the fragile goddess of the 1980s, Mickey embodied the dangerous man she was drawn to, both on and off screen. Together, they created something that transcended cinema. Perhaps that is why the story has never fully died. Hollywood thrives on secrets, on whispers of what might have been. And in the case of Kim Basinger and Mickey Rourke, the whispers are often more powerful than the truth. Were they lovers? Were they enemies? Or were they simply two performers caught in a game too dangerous to name? The answers may never come, but the allure remains. What can be said with certainty is that 9.5 weeks changed both of their lives. For Kim, it branded her as the ultimate sex symbol, a label she would struggle with for years to come. For Mickey, it cemented his image as Hollywood's most dangerous leading man. And for audiences, it offered a glimpse of a passion so volatile it still sparks debates decades later. By the time the credits rolled, both stars had been transformed. Kim was thrust further into fame, while Mickey slipped deeper into chaos. But the one thing they shared, forever tied together by that film, was the myth of their chemistry, a myth that continues to haunt Hollywood lore. Prince Rogers Nelson was never just a musician. By the late 1980s, he had already transcended the boundaries of pop stardom. He was a global phenomenon, a force of nature who blurred the lines between genres, genders, and even reality itself. After the explosive success of Purple Rain in 1984, Prince wasn't simply making music, he was rewriting the rules of artistry. He wore lace blouses one day and leather jackets the next, strutted across the stage in high heels, and embodied sexuality with a boldness that both shocked and seduced audiences worldwide. In a decade filled with pop idols, he stood alone, a genius who owned every note, every move, every whisper. By 1989, Prince was no longer just a star. He was a cultural giant, and Hollywood couldn't resist his gravitational pull. That year, fate placed him on a collision course with Kim Basinger, the woman who, at that very moment, was redefining the idea of a screen goddess. Basinger had just gone from 9.5 weeks notoriety to Batman fame, playing Vicky Vale opposite Michael Keaton. It was a role that elevated her from cult figure to blockbuster royalty. And who was providing the soundtrack to that very film? None other than Prince. It was the kind of coincidence that Hollywood gossip thrives on. Two of the most magnetic figures of the era, working on the same cultural juggernaut, their names appearing side by side in the credits. It didn't take long for rumors to spark. Insiders whispered that Kim had been spending time with Prince, not just casually, but privately, at his legendary Paisley Park estate in Minnesota. Paisley Park was more than a recording studio. It was Prince's kingdom, a surreal palace where he lived, worked, and created, often without ever leaving its walls. To be invited there was like being allowed into a secret society, a space where Prince's eccentric genius could unfold without limitation. For Kim Basinger, who had spent much of her career navigating the rigid expectations of Hollywood, Paisley Park was something entirely different. It was chaos and creativity, seduction and secrecy, all bound together by Prince's magnetic presence. Stories began to circulate that Kim and Prince were more than just professional acquaintances. According to some accounts, she didn't merely visit him. She practically moved into Paisley Park for a period of time, immersed in his strange, otherworldly world. There were whispers that they recorded music together, late-night sessions where she lent her voice to tracks that blurred the line between art and intimacy. One project in particular, the scandalous Sex Suite, became the center of the storm. Released as an extension of Prince's Batman soundtrack, it was rumored to feature Kim herself, whispering and breathing alongside his vocals. For fans, it was almost too much to imagine. The sex goddess of cinema, fresh off her steamy image in 9.5 weeks, entwined musically and possibly romantically with the most enigmatic rock star alive. The tabloids had a field day. Was this a love affair? A creative collaboration? Or something stranger, something that defied easy labels? The reality, as with so many stories involving Prince, remained elusive. Neither he nor Kim ever confirmed the relationship outright. Prince, famously private despite his flamboyant public persona, rarely spoke about his personal life in concrete terms. Kim, who was already wary of the press and its appetite for scandal, offered only silence. Their refusal to explain became part of the allure. But the fragments of truth that slipped through only made the story juicier. A producer here, a studio engineer there. People hinted at what they had seen or heard. They described Kim as deeply drawn into Prince's orbit, captivated by his artistry and his unpredictable energy. Others suggested that she was overwhelmed by the intensity of his world, the non-stop music, the secrecy, the way Prince seemed to live entirely by his own rules. What made the story so fascinating to Hollywood was not just the idea of a romance, but the symbolism of it. On one side, you had Kim Basinger, the blonde bombshell that audiences projected their fantasies onto, a woman marketed as fragile, sensual, and mysterious. On the other side, you had Prince, the ultimate musical provocateur, a man who could seduce through a guitar solo as easily as through a glance. Together, they embodied a kind of archetypal fantasy. The screen goddess and the musical genius, colliding in a blaze of sex, secrecy, and sound. Yet, just as quickly as the whispers began, they seemed to vanish. By the early 90s, the supposed fling had fizzled out of the headlines. Prince moved on, forever reinventing himself, forever chasing the next sound. Kim's career took her in new directions, from LA Confidential to high-profile marriages and divorces. The affair, if it ever truly existed, faded into the haze of Hollywood rumor. Still, the echoes remain. Decades later, the idea of Kim Basinger and Prince together continues to captivate fans. It feels almost mythological, the kind of story too perfect, too cinematic, to ever be fully proven or disproven. Was she his muse for a fleeting moment? Did they share a genuine romance hidden away in the purple shadows of Paisley Park? Or was it all smoke and mirrors, a tantalizing rumor born from the collision of two supernovas at the height of their fame? The truth may never be known. But perhaps that's the point. Prince thrived on mystery, carefully curating his image so that even his most intimate connections became part of his art. Kim, too, learned the value of secrecy in an industry that devoured its icons. By refusing to confirm or deny, they allowed the story to live forever in the realm of speculation, a perfect Hollywood legend that never needed to be resolved. And maybe, just maybe, that was their secret all along. By the time the 1990s dawned, Kim Basinger was a name that carried equal parts allure and mystery. To the public, she was the epitome of Hollywood glamour, a blonde goddess who could smolder in 9.5 weeks, enchant as Vicky Vale in Batman, and later prove her acting chops with the Oscar-winning LA Confidential. But behind the shimmering surface, Kim was quietly fighting battles that few of her fans could have imagined. Her struggles weren't with fading stardom or career missteps, they were far more personal, far more human. For most of her life, Kim had wrestled with anxiety so crippling that it shaped her choices, her relationships, even her very sense of safety in the world. She wasn't just shy, as the press often described her. She suffered from agoraphobia, an intense fear of open or public spaces, that sometimes made even a trip to the grocery store feel impossible. Friends and colleagues recalled how, at the height of her fame, she would retreat for weeks, sometimes months, into solitude. The same woman who could stand on a soundstage in front of cameras and command attention with a single glance often struggled to face the outside world. Fame only magnified the problem. The flashing lights, the relentless questions, the endless expectation to be flawless, they weren't just stressful, they were suffocating. Hollywood, of course, had no sympathy for fragility. The industry demanded goddesses, not vulnerable women. Producers and studio heads saw Kim as an icy blonde icon, someone who could sell tickets with a look, someone who could seduce the world without saying a word. But in private, she was collapsing under the weight of the persona built around her. This tension, between the public image and the private truth, became the silent backdrop to her most important relationships. Her rumored connection to Mickey Rourke in the 1980s was a perfect example. To outsiders, it seemed like an inevitable pairing. Two impossibly beautiful stars, radiating erotic tension both on and off screen. But for Kim, it wasn't so simple. Mickey embodied raw passion and recklessness, thrilling, magnetic, but also dangerous to someone as sensitive as she was. Their rumored romance never became public fact, but the intensity they shared in 9.5 weeks suggested a truth deeper than press releases. It was as though Kim had briefly touched the fire, only to retreat before being burned. Then came Prince. Where Mickey was fire, Prince was shadow, a mystery wrapped in lace and music. Kim's time at Paisley Park in the late 1980s became one of the most tantalizing what-ifs in Hollywood history. Did she and Prince share a romance, or was it simply a creative collaboration? The world still doesn't know. What's certain is that the idea of Kim and Prince together captured imaginations because it symbolized something larger, the goddess of cinema and the genius of sound, two artists hiding their real selves behind carefully constructed masks. If Mickey was raw passion, Prince was enigmatic attraction, a force that pulled Kim into his orbit only to vanish again without explanation. But life wasn't all rumor and shadow. In the 1990s, Kim did something the tabloids didn't expect. She settled into a very public marriage with actor Alec Baldwin. They met while filming The Marrying Man in 1990, and their chemistry was immediate. Unlike her secretive entanglements with Rourke and Prince, this relationship unfolded in front of cameras. For a time, they were Hollywood's golden couple. Beautiful, famous, and seemingly in love. They married in 1993 and had a daughter, Ireland, 2 years later. Yet even this love story wasn't immune to the pressures that haunted Kim. The marriage was turbulent, marked by clashes of personality and the unrelenting spotlight. Baldwin's fiery temper, Kim's fragility, and the constant invasion of paparazzi turned their romance into a tabloid battlefield. By 2002, the marriage collapsed in a bitter divorce, played out in courtrooms and headlines. To the public, it seemed like another fallen Hollywood romance. But for Kim, it was something more profound, another reminder that true love and public life rarely coexist in Hollywood. Looking back, what emerges is a portrait of a woman who lived at the crossroads of image and secrecy. Mickey Rourke represented a passion she couldn't fully claim. Prince embodied a mystery she couldn't explain. Alec Baldwin symbolized the attempt at normalcy that Hollywood never allowed her to maintain. Each man reflected a different side of Kim's struggle: desire, fascination, and the impossible dream of ordinary love. What makes these stories so haunting is what they reveal about Hollywood in the 1980s and 90s. This was an era when stars were commodities, not people. Image was everything, and to protect that image, secrets became a form of survival. Stars couldn't freely admit to unconventional romances, struggles with mental health, or vulnerabilities that made them appear weak. The industry demanded perfection, even as it devoured the imperfect humanity beneath the surface. Kim Basinger's secrets, the whispered romances, the hidden battles with anxiety, the careful balancing act between goddess and girl, weren't just her own. They were emblematic of the era itself. In the 1980s, Hollywood was a glittering machine fueled by desire and denial, and Kim was both its most luminous product and one of its most fragile victims. Yet her legacy isn't defined by fragility alone. She endured. She gave performances that still hold power decades later, from the heartbreaking eroticism of 9.5 Weeks to the smoldering sophistication of LA Confidential. She navigated the treacherous waters of fame and managed, somehow, to keep part of herself hidden, preserved from the world's relentless hunger. In the end, perhaps that's what makes her story so captivating. Kim Basinger will forever be remembered as the screen goddess of the 1980s, a woman who seemed to embody desire itself. But her real story was always written in shadows, in whispered rumors, in private battles, in the space between truth and myth. And maybe that's why her legend endures. Because in Hollywood, the most unforgettable stories aren't the ones played out on screen, but the ones that live forever in the mystery of what might have been. The story of Kim Basinger is not just the story of a Hollywood starlet. It's the story of a woman caught between desire, myth, and the suffocating demands of an industry built on illusion. From the raw, uncontainable fire of Mickey Rourke to the shadowy allure of Prince, Kim's journey through the 1980s and early 90s was more than a sequence of romances. These men symbolized extremes: Rourke as the embodiment of dangerous passion, Prince as the master of mystery and seduction. To imagine Kim with either of them was to imagine her stepping out of the carefully controlled Hollywood narrative and into something more real, more human, more fragile. And yet, whether or not these whispers were true was never the point. The myth mattered more than the facts. What remains undeniable is that Kim Basinger, like so many stars of her generation, was forced to live in two worlds. On one hand, the glossy magazine covers, the flashing red carpets, the icy goddess projected to millions of fans. On the other hand, the private woman, battling panic attacks, afraid of crowds, struggling to love and be loved under the harshest spotlight on earth. The very qualities that made her so magnetic on screen, The vulnerability in her eyes, the aura of fragility wrapped in beauty, were the same qualities that made her life off-screen so difficult. Hollywood in the 1980s was a prison made of flashbulbs. Stars couldn't admit to weakness. They couldn't reveal desires that didn't fit the marketable fantasy. They couldn't be fully human. And so, their truths were hidden, behind closed doors, in whispered affairs, in rumors that were never confirmed but never fully denied. Mickey Rourke and Prince became more than men in Kim's orbit. They became symbols of everything Hollywood demanded its stars keep in the dark. Contrast that with today. In a world where celebrities are more open about their struggles, their identities, and their relationships, Kim's secrets remind us just how much was concealed in that glittering era. What we saw on the silver screen was dazzling, yes, but it was never the whole story. Behind every iconic still frame, there were shadows. Behind every goddess, there was a woman fighting to survive. And maybe that's why Kim Basinger's legend endures. Because she wasn't just an actress, or a sex symbol, or even an Oscar winner. She was a mystery, someone who gave just enough of herself to capture the world's imagination, but never so much that the mystery was solved. Mickey Rourke gave us the fantasy of unrestrained passion. Prince gave us the enigma of forbidden attraction. But Kim herself gave us something more enduring. The reminder that even the brightest stars are human beings, vulnerable and complicated, trapped in a world that demanded perfection. As the credits roll on her story, one truth stands above the rest. The Kim Basinger we knew on screen was only half the story. The rest, the whispered romances, the hidden fears, the secrets buried in the shadows, will always remain just out of reach. And perhaps that's exactly how it was meant to be. Because the silver screen gave us Kim Basinger the icon. But it's the secrets we'll never fully know that keep her legend alive.